Susan Hodara, and way back around 2000, Vicki Adesso, Laurie Toppel, and I signed up for a memoir workshop taught by Joan Potter at the Hudson Valley Writers Center. We re-enrolled several times, and over a few years, we got to know and respect one another and our writing. Then we jumped to 2006, when the four of us decided to form a writing group. We began meeting every Thursday morning at my dining room table, reading and critiquing one another's work. One day, completely serendipitously, the four of us brought stories to share about our mothers. Hey, we could write a book, we said. The result is Still Here Thinking of You, A Second Chance with Our Mothers. That's the book. It was published in 2013 by Big Table Publishing. In the book, which we call a collaborative memoir, each of us has a section in which we tell the stories of our relationships with our mothers, from our early childhoods to their old age. In the process of writing our stories together, not only was a bond formed between the four of us, but our perceptions of our mothers expanded and transformed. Today, we will each read a chapter from our section. Joan isn't here. She's supposed to be here somewhere, but she's not here at all because of internet connectivity issues. So I'm going to read her chapter. We're going to follow the order of the book, which begins with Joan. So, and I just want to add, I wasn't going to do this, but my mother is here. Of the four of us, I'm the only one whose mother was alive when we were writing the book, and she's still alive, and she's here. So, but from Joan's section, this is a chapter called Having Her Way. My mother was never satisfied with the first table she chose in a restaurant. When I visited her in California, we often ate out. She would take a seat, and whoever was with her, me, my husband, my sisters, would pick our chairs or slide into a booth. Then she'd look around the room and see a spot she liked better. Maybe it was near a window or farther from the air conditioner's breeze, or it just had that indefinable something that caught her attention. Once, on the patio of a Santa Monica restaurant where several of us had gathered for lunch, the only table that struck her as appropriate happened to have been chosen by other people who were just opening their menus. My mother approached them. She was in her 60s then, a small, pleasant-looking woman. When confronting strangers with requests, she was polite but firm. She had an air of determination that people seemed unable to resist. I watched my mother explain to the seated group that their space was the only one where our family could possibly sit. Maybe it was shadier or it had more room. The rest of us stood back and saw the people rise from their chairs and take their menus to another table. I was more amused than embarrassed, and looking back, I still admire her gumption. Many of her displays of stubbornness took place when she was behind the wheel of her car, a '74 Chevy Monte Carlo, dark reddish brown with a wide grille and long curving fenders. After my father died, she had moved to a small community just off the northbound lanes of the Pacific Coast Highway, which parallels the ocean. To get to Santa Monica, where she went several times a week, she had to drive south for a few miles. She could have turned north onto the highway and gone the short distance to Sunset Boulevard, where there was a traffic light. But no, she insisted on waiting for a break in the oncoming traffic, speeding across two lanes and wedging the car into the southbound flow. A few times when I happened to be with her during that maneuver, I clutched the armrest and gritted my teeth. Mom, I'd say, why don't you just go to Sunset and turn around at the light? This is so dangerous. She'd tighten her lips and ignore me. As always, I was defenseless in the face of her tenacity. Her home was a few miles from the Getty Museum, which had a collection of ancient artifacts and expansive gardens. You could reach the entrance from the highway. Admission was free, and I thought it would be a perfect place for the two of us to spend an afternoon. No, I don't think so. You wouldn't like it, she said each time I suggested a visit. I didn't argue. I knew I'd lose. What did she have against the Getty Museum? I'll never know, and I never got to see it. She was just as convincing when dealing with authority figures. Once she told me the story of her encounter with a police officer when she was driving to her volunteer job at Santa Monica Hospital. She was tooling along, almost there, when she saw a police car in back of her, its red lights flashing. She didn't stop until she arrived at the hospital's parking lot. The cop pulled in behind her, lights still twirling, and walked over to her window. "Ma'am," he said, "do you realize you just drove through a red light?" "Officer," she said, "I never drive through red lights." He just shook his head and walked away. In 1994, when she was 84 years old, she was still driving down to the hospital 3 days a week. That January, at 4:30 on a Wednesday morning, a strong earthquake struck Los Angeles. It was about 8 o'clock in New York when a friend called and told me to turn on the television. Frantic newscasters appeared on the screen, predicting widespread damage, injuries, deaths. Certain I wouldn't be able to reach my mother, but desperate to contact her, I dialed her number. After 2 rings, I heard her say, "Hello," in her usual ladylike voice. The tremors had shaken her awake, she said, and she'd heard things falling off shelves, but it was too dark to see what had happened, and her electricity was out. I told her about the damage I'd seen on television and that Santa Monica had been especially hard hit. "I'm sure the Pacific Coast Highway won't be open," I said. "Don't even think of trying to get to the hospital today." "We'll see," she said, her usual response when she was determined to do what she wanted. A few hours later, my husband and I sat in front of the TV, drinking coffee and watching shots of collapsed houses, burning buildings, and crumbling roadways. We heard the announcer say that because of rock slides and rubble, the Pacific Coast Highway had been closed. We were shown a helicopter shot of a length of the highway 4 lanes wide and completely empty of traffic. Then, at the top of the screen, a lone car appeared, traveling south. It moved purposely along, all alone, until it drove out of sight. "Look," said my husband, "there goes your mother." So, the next section of our book is Vicki's, and Vicki will be the next reader.
I'm going to be reading a chapter titled Snowstorm. We are separated by the glass of the storm door. I watch my mother on the other side. Snow is falling, heavy and white, and she shovels the walkway, clearing a path to our house. I hear the crunch of the snow and scrape of the shovel as she plunges it into the drifts and digs down to the concrete. Rhythmically, she pushes through the snow, lifting heaps and tossing it off to the side. I see the top of her head in a black woolen cap, and the fog she breathes out floating up and around her like a halo. I am sitting on the floor, still in my pajamas, wrapped in an afghan of red and green yarn she had crocheted. I sniffle and cough. 8 years old, bored and angry, I want to play in the snow. I push against the door to open it a crack. The frigid air rushes in and I shiver. "Please," I yell out to her. "I told you no, and I'm not going to answer you anymore," she says. I have missed the last 2 days of school because of my cold, but today is a snow day and all the kids are staying home. My brother and sister are out in the backyard with our friends, bundled up in their snow pants, boots, jackets, scarves, mittens, and hats. When I crack the door open again, I hear loud screams of laughter blowing around the side of the house with the snow. I let the door slam shut. She doesn't look up. She is working fast, for she's getting cold, and the path to the door is long. Behind her, I see the evidence of her hard work disappearing. The snow doesn't quit, piling up as quickly as she shovels it away. She will clear some now and then come back out later to start all over again. My father is at work and won't return until the morning. It's supposed to snow until nighttime. I breathe out with my mouth open, making a circle of fog on the glass. I trace my initials in the center, then wipe the glass clear and look at my mother. She is closer, and I can hear her grunting as she lifts the heavy snow. Her back will be sore tonight, and she'll soak in a hot bath after she has settled us down for the night. She stops, leaning one arm on the shovel, rubbing her lower back with her other hand. She looks over at me. You should get up off the floor and away from that door. It's freezing. You're going to make yourself sicker. Shut up, I whisper. I want to yell it out to her, but I don't dare. She goes back to work. The snow flies through the air and sounds like baby kisses as it hits the glass of the door. I look at the tiny spots, each flake a miniature lace doily flattened against the glass. They stick and then they fade away. I open the door again and lean out. I want to come out in the snow. You have to let me. She stands in front of me, pulling the door open wider as she rests the shovel against the wall. Honey, you're sick. You have a fever. Please stop whining and get away from the door. I'm coming in now. I scoot back along the floor and out of her way. She stamps her feet on the doormat to knock off the snow and then pulls her boots off as she steps inside. I hate you, I say. She stops and stands still, staring straight ahead, saying nothing. Again, I hate you. My mother turns and looks down at me. Her eyes are tired, their lids heavy and slow. Her nose is red from the cold, her lips pale and chapped. From her head, her hair is wet with perspiration at the temples. You hate your mother? Because I won't let you go outside when you're sick? You hate me? She says quietly. Then she walks past me, through the kitchen and into the foyer, to hang up her wet jacket and lay her hat and gloves on the radiator. I start to cry. I want to call her back, tell her I'm sorry, that I didn't mean what I said, but I don't. Instead, I stand and move back to the door to watch the snow erase my mother's shoveled path. When it has disappeared completely, I am satisfied. That's the end. And now Lori will read from her section. Thank you.
Okay. I'm reading the first piece in my section, and it's called Las Narrators. That morning, my mother and I didn't walk to school. We usually did, around 8, when the sun was calm. She'd hold my hand as we stepped in rhythm down the 3 blocks from our apartment building on Calle Joffrey to the nursery school. I was 4. The woman who ran the school was bilingual, but I can't remember much else about her. I recall her tidy house and the freestanding arch through which the children, many of whom were American, passed every morning to enter the playground. Painted along the curve of the arch was the name Las Narrators. The concrete playground held a sandbox, a set of swings, a jungle gym, and off in a corner, a shack. Inside were 2 or 3 picnic benches. There was no door, just a doorway. Palm trees, like lazy sentinels, surrounded the yard. What made me feel reflective, even at that age, was a flamboyant tree, the only stroke of brightness against the fronds sky. The flowers were flaming red, and the branches blue like crimson scarves in the wind. When the flowers fell, they remained a bold stain on the cement for days. I recall sipping from cold juice boxes that perspired in the humidity. The teacher must have fetched them from her kitchen while we ate our snacks, bowls of plátanos and chicharrones. My mother packed me another snack, a bologna sandwich on white, no crust, in a small tin Flintstones lunchbox. My mother, Estella May Webb, was born on July 4th, 1924, in Tottenham, a region about 6 miles northeast of Charing Cross in central London. She was mischievous, a pixie of a girl, often caned by the nuns at her Catholic school. Her parents, Anglicans, advised her to think Catholic so she could attend the better school. After living through the Blitz, she boarded a ship to New York, where her older sister had settled. Her sister's husband introduced my mother to my father. After they were married, they moved to Puerto Rico. I was born in April 1960 in Hato Rey. My father joined his 2 brothers, who had founded a chain of modern supermarkets called Pueblo. My mother seemed pleased to be known as Senora Milton Toppel. At a fashion show, a photographer from a Spanish newspaper asked her to pose with my sister and me for their style section. It was El Dia del Sombrero, Day of the Hats, and my mother wore one she'd made, a flat basket filled with plastic fruits and little boxes of treats. That morning, because of my new pink ballerina slippers that matched my tutu, my mother asked her chauffeur, Isabello, to drive us to the nursery school. Isabello was in his 20s, a shy 6-foot-tall black man with closely cropped hair and a chipped front tooth. Whenever I looked at him, I focused on his bright, broken tooth. He didn't really speak English. I'd hear him at the front door, apologizing to my mother for something or other in his quick, soft Spanish. He had scraped the car against a street lamp, or he was late because of a traffic jam. My mother had never learned to drive. She sometimes took a taxi, but a taxi required a fair grasp of Spanish, and hers was poor. When I was very young, I'd watch her try to communicate, having no idea that her lack of grace in a language I spoke so effortlessly was not an act. I thought she was trying to be funny. With the air conditioner chilling the car, my mother draped a cotton cardigan around her shoulders. She wore a sleeveless linen dress that showed off her hourglass figure. Pink roses dotted the neckline, so our outfits complemented each other. The radio was playing local music, and her foot lightly tapped against the car floor. My mother loved to dance, but loved even more to watch my sister and me dance. She'd say, "Come on, Lol," and reach for my hand, her cigarette in the air, her head tilted back, and she'd shimmy. I'd join in laughing. Music was an affectionate animal that leapt through the rooms of our home. We had a pianola, and we popped in a scroll for the keyboards to automatically play. My mother would sit between my sister and me, and we'd sing Stella by Starlight, the keys rippling under our fingers, our voices rising toward the end like a swaying choir. Her favorite songs were so ingrained in my mind that I felt I had written them. Today was performance day. I'd been practicing for some time. "You look like a perfect little ballerina, Lollipop," my mother said. "You're not nervous, are you?" I shook my head no, but I wasn't sure. I was fine at keeping my balance, and the balance beam rose only a few inches off the ground. It wasn't much longer than the sandbox. Isabello was perspiring at the back of his neck, although the air conditioner was blasting. I never considered that perhaps my mother made him anxious. "Aquí, here, Isabello, and pick us up at 10, comprende?" she said, signaling that he should not go any farther. He'd almost missed the school. Within seconds, he was holding the door for my mother, and she emerged like Queen Elizabeth, glancing around at her subjects. She had pride in her country's majesty and had taught my sister and me the British national anthem. "Come, come, Lol," she said, flicking out her hand, and I grabbed it, eager to be part of her beauty and eminence. "Oh, the cupcakes. Isabello, please." He opened the passenger car door and lifted out a tray. As often as she played the frisky Brit who wished to partake in any festivity, she would sometimes pass through a mist of discontent, and I'd watch her closely and become too quiet. She'd notice right away and quickly excite me with an outing or a story. We strolled through the archway into the schoolyard, where a row of folding chairs had been set up under the shade of the flamboyant tree and in front of the balance beam. Drinks waited on picnic tables inside the shack, its ceiling adorned with ribbons, and my mother and the nursery teacher chattered away while arranging the cupcakes on the tables. I stood in the doorway, staring at the balance beam. Next to it, A metal chair held a phonograph, and the teacher walked past me and stopped at the chair to greet everyone, pointing to where all the girls and boys should assemble. I scurried to my place. She lowered the needle on the record. I glanced at the row of mothers, and I spotted mine. Already smiling, she waved at me, but I looked away, embarrassed for having checked on her attentiveness. The first girl began walking on the beam. She crossed to the end without ever once tilting off balance. Then came the second girl. Perhaps she was giggling, and then I was up. The beam seemed extremely narrow before I even touched it, as if overnight someone had cut its width in half. I stepped on the bar, spread out my arms, trying to look poised, as my mother had so often taught me. And I put one foot ahead of the other. While the music pushed me forward, I almost lost my balance. Fear surged through my body. I continued, but within seconds tipped to the side. My foot struck the cement. I took off toward my mother and settled like a plume in her lap. Bravo, you did very well, Lori, very well. Did you hurt yourself? I didn't respond. I watched the next girl step up. My mother rested my head against her shoulder, for I was, she knew, a lovely dancer. And now Susan will read.
Okay, so this is my section, and it's a chapter called My Mother's Leg. We are visiting my mom because of her left hand, but it is the image of her right leg that stays with me. She fell a few days earlier, walking downhill on wet leaves near her home. She is 82, healthy and upbeat, but she walks cautiously, reaching out for support from whatever is nearby, especially when she's rounding a corner. I should have been more careful, she says, of the moments before her fall. My mother didn't report the incident to me for 2 days. On the phone, she told me she fell forward. The gloves she was wearing tore from the impact, and she scraped her knee through her fleece pants. My nose was bleeding, she said. A man driving by stopped to see if she was hurt. He had his young son in the back seat, she went on, so I felt all right taking him up on his offer to bring me home. In my mind, she hits the ground like a board. The picture of her lying face down on the sidewalk, blood flowing from her nose, makes me shudder. A visit to her doctor the next day determined no bones were broken. I was lucky, she said. I find it hard to believe because my hand is so swollen. Which is why Paul and I decided to make the trip from New York. She stands behind the glass door to her house, watching as we make our way up the walk, and kisses us each on the cheek when we enter. She wears tan corduroys and one of my father's turtlenecks beneath a coral-colored cotton sweater I gave her years ago. Her short gray hair provides little contrast to her pale complexion. You can see the cuts on the sides of her nose where her glasses were shoved into her face. She is smiling, and I am glad to see she seems fine. Her hand, however, emerges from her sleeve like a bruised fruit. It is blue and gray, so bloated no knuckles are visible. My mother says she isn't using it, but I catch her repeatedly involving it in activities alongside her right hand, balancing the side of the orange juice bottle or holding the edge of a baking sheet of potatoes. Don't do that, I yell, but she ignores me. My mother is as caught as I am between the reality of her age and the memory of who she always was. Her fall dislodges us both, and all weekend I observe her. Because of the cold, she dresses in layers that thicken her silhouette. For most of her life, my mother, who was an inch or so over 5 feet tall, was petite and slender. She tucked her blouses into her slacks. She had a secret stash of miniature chocolate bars that she ate watching television at night. To keep my weight up, she explained once when I discovered the bag. Now her belly protrudes roundly onto her lap when she sits. I notice the way the sides of her cheeks hang as if tired, and the blurriness of the line from her chin to her neck. I don't see my mother's leg until the next morning, when she decides to change the Band-Aid that is protecting the scrape on her right knee. She is standing, and I am sitting nearby on the edge of her bed. She is wearing her nightgown and has to lift its bottom edge up to her thigh to keep it out of the way. The scrape looks like a child's skinned knee, softened from the bacitracin she's been using. The way her nightgown is raised, I can see a side view of almost the entire length of her leg. It stands rooted to the floor, the skin the faintest pink, sprinkled with freckles and cherry red spots, and slightly mottled, especially close to the top. The calf is cone-shaped, its skin smooth and taut, ending abruptly at the lumpy circle of her knee. The thigh is a larger cone, mushier and less defined. The only time I've seen my mother's bare legs is when she wears her bathing suit, but I've never paid them any attention. Now her right leg is displayed before me. I study it as she works to apply her Band-Aid. I examine it for signs of age, for flaccidness or decay. I think briefly of my father, dead almost a year. Then it strikes me, this is my own leg. I recognize the color and the shape, the tone of the flesh. I've never identified my body with my mother's. Hers, I thought, was finer, more delicate. I always considered myself stocky. But her leg, I finally recognized, is my leg. It isn't fat, it is solid and functional. But it isn't elegant, it isn't beautiful. It stands on the floor the way a leg is meant to do. For an instant, it makes me sad, this sudden nearness to my mother's body. But I dispel the feeling, retaining only the image. The limb, so human, irregular and too short, the color like pearl. So that's it. Now we can have questions or discussion. I don't know, everybody's muted, so, and I don't know if there's any, no, there's no chats here. So if anyone has any comments or questions or thoughts, here we are.
I'll just start off by saying thank you so much, and those were all so beautiful and moving in very different ways. I guess I'm wondering for you, Susan, being the only person in the group with a mom still living who's actually present with you, how does that change the process? Because I think I would personally find it very hard to write about my living mother and have the perspective.
Yeah, I mean, I was able to successfully not think about my mother reading this when I was writing it. And then before it was published, I think I gave her a copy of my section and she was okay with it, she said. And by the way, it's not all wonderful. There's some, you know, earlier times we weren't as close as we are now. And so, but she was okay with it. And then it came out as a book and she read it again and she said, I don't know if you remember this, Mom. She said, you know, there are some things in there that I'm not that happy to read. But it was too late at that point. And even today, I emailed, I said, you know, I'm going to read this chapter and I want to make sure it's okay with you because, you know, who knows. But I think the key was writing it. I really had to not think about her reading it because otherwise I'd be like second guessing, you know, all the things. I know one other thing about that is that there was one story I was writing about a time when my mother came to visit me without my father, and I wanted to ask her about it. So I said, do you remember that time you came to visit me without Dad? And she said, no, I don't remember that. I remember a time we came and you made a big dinner party for us. And I had no memory of the dinner party. So it messed me up for that chapter. I had to change the way I wrote it because I had said it was the only time she came to visit me and it wasn't the only time. And I decided after that I wasn't going to ask any questions. I was going to rely on my own memories. So, yeah.
Good. A question for any of you is, I've always been fascinated about how you even write memoir because my memory is terrible. So I think out of laziness or fear, I write fiction because it gives you that safety of being able to make things up. And, you know, if you you could change the facts. So I don't know how you even access a lot of that stuff. And do you take liberties with writing the best possible stories in some circumstances and not necessarily staying exactly true?
Everything I wrote in when I write memoir, to me, everything is true. Meaning I really work from my memory. My memory isn't perfect. So when there's spots I'm not sure about, I will say that, may have been this, it might've been this is what I think probably happened. But my family says I have a great memory. They're really surprised. Like when my siblings read the book, they were like, wow, you remember so much. But we did have some discussions where they remembered things totally differently. And we were like arguing. And then I just said, but that's what I remember. To me, that's what happened. That's my truth. That's what I remembered. And I don't know about the rest of you, but yeah.
Yeah. Laurie, I think Laurie, because I'm interested in what you would say to that, Laurie, because you write fiction and memoir.
Yes. I think with memoir for me, I mean, I sort of feel as if I'm finding my way back. And, it's sort of like the woods, and there are bright spots, and those bright spots are very clear to me. Oh, I remember being there. And, whether it's going to turn into this narrative. As a fiction writer, I'm tempted to shape it as a narrative, but I resist. And with the help of my fellow authors, I stayed very true to how it happened. But then you can shape it in other ways. You can shape it with detail, and it becomes another kind of work altogether. The thing with fiction, I find, is you're choosing certain subjects, and I think that can be more revealing than remembering what happened in your life sometimes. I think.
Yeah. And I also think it's funny the things we do remember, because even like what I read today it wasn't like a big story. It wasn't like something happened. It was just this very vivid memory. But what was so important to me about it was the emotion I felt for saying that to my mother. I hate you. I was like so angry, and I was so young, and I wanted to just rebel against her already at 8 years old. And some of the things you remember are like so inconsequential, and yet you remember them so clearly. And then things that are so big, you don't always remember. Yeah. I don't know if everybody finds that, but that about memory.
Yeah. And I just want to add, just to Krista, so I always say this, and I think we all agree with this, we never make anything up in memoir, because once you start making things up, you are really going into fiction. You might as well go into fiction, because, as Laurie said, like so much is, it's well, I don't know if Laurie said this, but I think I don't write fiction, but I'm sure that stories come from personal experience. But yeah, if you start making things up, just call it fiction.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I'll stick with fiction because I just can't remember enough. But thank you. I have a question in the chat. I don't know if you noticed, from Margaret, who says, it's so wonderful to hear the stories I read and enjoyed so thoroughly. Did you have a hard time deciding on telling specific stories in present or past tense? Did that come up for anybody?
Let's see. I'm just thinking, what was my... I mean, Vicki's, I know, was in present tense. Mine was also in present tense. It's interesting. I would just say to that sometimes for me, writing in present tense makes it more immediate, so that I can experience what it was like to be there more clearly. But
yeah, I think I wrote most of it in present tense because I would like get so into the memory that I would write it like I am here now doing this. So that's why I did it that way. It was because I wanted to be the age. I wanted to write it with the same emotions I had at different periods of my life. So I had to make it present tense and be in that time, in that moment when I wrote it.
Yeah.
It changes the tone and the effect. I think, the tense. So it depends.
Yeah.
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 And so Susan, you mentioned you were all in a writing group together and you kind of all discovered you just happened to be writing about your mothers. Was that kind of your ongoing topic, and does it continue that way?
Oh, well, we're done with our mothers.
Yeah.
And
Okay.
now we, yeah, because we were writing all different things, but now we still meet, but now we have to meet on Zoom, which,
Yeah.
you know, but we're writing all different things now. So, and Laurie's working on fiction, and now even Vicki's working on fiction.
Yes. Yeah.
So, yeah, and Joan and I are still memoir, stuck with memoir.
And
I didn't want to write about my mother.
yeah.
It was very difficult for me. I just lost her, and we had a tough relationship. She really changed at some point. So I was very resistant, but then it became a challenge. So it was, okay, I can do this. And it was quite the experience that we had.
Yeah.
Yeah, working on this, it took a long time. Yeah, it took a long time.
It's funny because when I first, I signed up for Joan's memoir writing workshop a year after my mother passed away. So I know it was 1998. That's when I met Joan. And in the very first meeting of the very first memoir class I ever took with Joan, she asked us to write for 15 minutes, just spur of the moment. And the first thing I wrote was a memory of my mother from my childhood. And I just kind of just kept writing about her from that moment on. And that piece is in the book. It ended up in the book. The thing I started out with in my first memoir class ended up in the book. But yeah, it was hard to write some of the stuff about my mother. And my father was still alive when the book came out, which was a problem for me because I did not get along with my father. I had problems with my father. I didn't even want him to know I wrote the book, but my brother told him. And he ended up calling me to the house, and he cried and he apologized to me for a lot of stuff, and he liked it. So that was a big thing that happened from writing this book. Yeah.
Sylvia Lee is in the chat and she says all four of you write beautifully. Very true. Her mother will be 96 years old in 5 weeks. Wow.
Yeah.
She imagines it's difficult to write about one's mother. Congratulations for doing this task. I hope to write about my mom one day. She has a question for you. Are any of you mothers?
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah. We all are.
Mothers.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And are you scared of your daughters writing a memoir?
Yeah, exactly. That's what I was going to say. I don't really want them to write a book of me, but yeah, and I think I imagine it would be really difficult to read their memories of things that I maybe remember differently. I mean, that already comes up, and when they tell me, "Oh, you're always such a nag," and I thought I was such a great mother, so that happens. Yeah.
Oh, I feel like I have two sons, and they're in their 20s, but I think I gave them a lot of material to work with. So my one son is a songwriter, so let's see, maybe he'll write a song about me.
I bet. Yeah.
People in the chat, you're welcome to unmute yourselves if you'd rather speak up, but I'm going to keep reading a few questions in the chat. Margaret is back again, and she says, is it hard to let go of a story to freeze that perspective in a way by publishing it? Do you reread any of this and feel that you would change anything now?
Well, we were just talking about that yesterday, how
we did.
Yeah, go ahead, Susan.
Well, go ahead. No, go Vicki.
No, I was just going to say how I haven't really looked at it came out in 2013, right? Am I right? 2013. And we were doing readings for like a year all the time reading it. And I haven't really looked at it in a while. And yesterday we were talking about how, yeah, we would have kept working on some of the stories. We think they could have been even, we could have done a better job. At least that's what I think,
Yeah, that's right. I felt the same way. Like, I can't believe I actually changed a word that I read today because I couldn't stand reading the word that I had written, because it was repeated 2 lines later. I can't believe that I did that. and didn't care or didn't notice it. So yeah, so there is something about that. And I noticed Amy's question also.
Question, yeah.
What is it like to revisit these pieces years later? Are you tempted to change or revise them? Which is a similar question. So absolutely, yeah, I think, but at the same time, okay, I would say this. If I had to write this book again, it would probably be, or my section, it would probably be very, very similar. I think I wrote what I wanted to write. I think I would tweak the writing, but I also don't want to. Like I've said this, I've told these stories, and now I want to tell other stories. So
yeah, it's like, not like the stories would change, you know, and I don't think there's any more stories I would want to add to it or anything I'd want to take out. It's just more the writing part, the technical part of the writing.
Yeah.
You know, I look at it and I go, oh, I don't like the way that sounds, and, you know, things like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's an amazing thing, because we had the four of us, and we must have read this, our sections and each other's sections, I don't know how dozens of times, it seems like. And, you know, we would edit each other, and still you come back to it and there's something that you want to just make it a little different.
Mm.
Another question from Sarah. Do you ever worry that you only have one story in you? I don't think that's a problem for any of you, right?
Well, I mean, like, if all I had was the story of my mother, I have other stories. I've written about my father, a lot. In fact, when I was in Joan's class, I was always writing about my father, and Joan would say, well, you know, what about your mother? And I'd say, you know, I don't really have anything to say about my mother, but then I did. And now I'm writing about other things, very different. So
I don't worry about not having any more stories to tell. I mean, I've been writing fiction lately, but my problem is, I think I have like an ADD problem, because I'll start a story and then, you know, and then I start another story, and then I start another story. I'm trying to finish the things I've started before I think of anything else to write. I'm impatient.
I understand.
Mm.
And the longer you write, I think you know, depending on where you are in your life, there's always something coming at you that's different, which you can turn into a story or interpret in a way that even if I were to write about my mother again, it would be something that wasn't touched at all in this book.
Mm-hmm.
So I think there's always that, which thankfully there's always that.
Yeah.
So from Margaret, did any of you do any research of any kind, including speaking to other family members while working on these pieces?
I did not. No, I just wrote from my memories, and that was it. Yeah.
me too.
Yes.
And as I said, I asked one question that didn't work out too well, so I stopped. But yeah, it was about my memories.
But with Joan, though, I mean, I know she's not here to answer. She did have that tape. Did that play a part in? I'm trying to remember.
Yeah, I think it did. That's true. She had a tape that her mother had made, I think, for her sister later in life about her life. And Joan had that tape and she listened to it. And some of the stories became part of the book. And so that was there. And, you know, I mean, you might research. I think the only thing I was thinking about Joan with the name of some hotel or something, or a store, or, you know, you can Google for the names. I think there was a part where my mother's singing a song and I Googled the lyrics of the song, that kind of research.
That's more fact check.
Yeah, right. Yeah, factual stuff.
Yeah.
I'm harping on this because my memory is so awful, but it seems to me memoir is really about the major topic in it is memory and how you access that and what's flawed about it. So do you admit that in the writing that your perspective might be different than other people's? You might not have this quite right?
Yeah. Absolutely. Like I said, my brother would say, no, like you know, one of the stories. No, that didn't happen. That happened to me, not you, or, you know, and but to me, I can't believe them. I think I'm right. So, yeah.
And in the writing,
yeah, in the story itself.
Yeah, I was looking, but I can't find it. But there's one where I say that I don't remember this, and I don't remember that, but I do remember, you know, this image of her walking down the hall. And it's sort of it's the way memory is. It's memory is sometimes it's this out of context visual thing that you don't really know how to place it. And I acknowledge that by just saying I don't really know. I don't know those things, but I do know this thing.
Which I think makes us trust you more when you admit
I agree. I think that's the right. It's a contract between the writer and the reader that this is true.
And a lot of it is perspective, meaning I'm interpreting my mother's words and actions emotionally from my perspective. You know, it's you know, and my brother and sister may see what I wrote about and say, she wasn't meaning it that way, or she didn't do that to you, really, you know? So it is your perspective, and memory is not perfect, you know? My memories may be wrong, you know, but they're so real to me that they are what I see my past as, is what I remember, you know?
Right, that your memories reveal a lot about who you are. So when you check with a family member, they're kind of letting you know, I remember this part because at that time or now that mattered to me. So there's,
Right.
Yeah.
Another question, did you seek other readers beyond the 4 of you before you felt it was ready to be published?
Did we? I don't think we did.
I don't think so.
We had that agent, she read stuff, but I don't think we ever changed anything. Did we change it because of her? Remember her way back when?
Yeah, I think we changed it. Oh no, we changed our proposal, but I'm not sure. We
No,
know
not the book. I think that's just the 4 of us. Yeah.
And we didn't go outside of
No, and the reason is because I think the reason is because we had the 4 of us. That's a lot of people and a lot of input. And you know, I don't know that we were ready for, or we were a little saturated maybe.
It's a really nice situation to already have that many readers built into the project. Great.
Right.
And we still meet. Now it's every other Thursday, and we do it online. But it's wonderful to have each other. It is.
And we all have different strengths, and like, you know, Joan and I tend to be pretty careful with the copy editing, and then we'll catch things that the other one didn't catch. And then Laurie has a whole other perspective because your writing style is different. And then, you know, and then Vicki's like maybe the last person to read it for whatever reason. Noticed something completely that nobody noticed. Like, you know, wait, you said it was to the left, but now you say it's to the right. And nobody had noticed it. We'd all read it a million times. So we all have different things that we see. And that works pretty well.
The question from Sarah is kind of different. Do you have any advice about collecting stories from aged mothers? Sounds like you didn't do this so much as your memories, but I'm wondering about how to elicit informant action from a mother who won't be around for much longer.
That's a great question. I wish I had done that more, my mother. I mean, of course, and my father, but it's I guess it's a difficult thing to answer unless, I mean, to see how comfortable one's mother is with talking about certain things.
My mother was, you know, youngish when she passed away. Actually, I'm older than her now, which is a weird feeling. Older than she ever was. But my aunt her sister's still around, and she's 85, and I have so much fun picking her brain about things. But I don't really do it for writing, but I have learned so much. But she loves to tell me the stories about, you know, her and my mother growing up together, where they lived, you know, what their parents were like, and all of that stuff. But I didn't do that for writing. Yeah.
That's a wonderful situation when someone's a good storyteller and they just want to, But if you have somebody who isn't, then it just becomes important to you to know. And I guess if you can convey that, it would be helpful.
Yeah. And I have tried to, I've told my mother to write some of her memories down as a memoir, and she has. And I keep telling her to write more because I know there are so many pieces of this that are, like sometimes I just say, well, where did you get that lamp? Because I'm not going to know. And there's all the kinds of things. And so, my mother's willing, but then again, it's how much she's willing to take the time to write it. So, it's not just it's for her too. Anyway, yeah.
It helps, Susan, that you're a journalist, and so you're asking those questions anyway.
Kind of, but I mean, a lot of times when I'm visiting, or I haven't visited for a while now, but that is not what we do. We don't sit around and talk about the past. We could, but we don't. Yeah. I don't know. Sometimes we do, but we don't.
Well, going back to if my kids would ever write about me, I keep a journal. I write daily in my journal for like 40 years. I have journals, like piles of them. So they'll have they can do all their own research. They'll have it all, the whole thing. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
That's terrifying. If anybody read my journal.
That's true.
On that note, were there stories that you just couldn't tell? Margaret asks.
That is I would have to say, probably not. I think I went pretty far, as far as I had to go with this one.
I had a hard time with a few of the chapters because it was very personal, revealing. I felt like I was betraying my mother because I was telling these true stories, and it wasn't always perfect. She had problems, I had problems. So, but I did tell them anyway. So no, I don't think there's anything that I hid that I wanted to write.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think I did that either. I think, if anything, when I remembered something that was particularly upsetting or dark or just hadn't really settled in me the way I would hope it would have at that point, I tried to sort of weed through why that happened, and it was helpful.
And you know what was really amazing? I just thought of this because I did write there's one chapter about my mother where, she was drinking, and she had a drinking problem and a really bad night. And I was so afraid to put, remember when I read it to Joan, Susan, and Lori, their comments after were amazing. I think I wrote, it's all in my journal, but they saw things about that one night I was writing about, and they brought these things to my attention about my mother that I didn't see myself. And I was able to see it in a different way, where it was easier to write it and let it be read by other people, because they saw different things about my mother that I didn't see. It was really interesting.
Yeah. I'm thinking, because that's such a common fear that people writing memoir have, is that they're going to betray, or reveal some secret, or betray some trust, or betray someone who's not even alive. But I mean, just listening to you guys' stories, I'm so moved by them still, or more so maybe because I haven't revisited the book for a while. And I think the reason why I'm not talking about my section, but I really, really admire what those guys wrote, because they went deep, and they weren't flinching from away from things. It reminds me of the reading that was at the Writers Center with Sigrid Nunez. Who was it? Anyway, and she said something about, you can't flinch when you're writing. If you flinch, the reader knows it. And it's sort of like you have to go all the way. It
wouldn't have been if I had left out the hard parts about our relationship, it would have not been real. You know, it would have been like, bleh, you know, it would have just been this fake thing. And as hard as it was, in the end, I'm glad I wrote it the way I did. And I feel like, you know, she's not here, but I feel like she'd be fine with it. I really do.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
For what it's worth, my mother would not be fine with it. That's okay.
That's why I'm not writing about my mom anytime.
Yeah, but I think that does have to do with the personality of your mother. You know, I mean, my mother, who's here now, I mean, right here, is very tolerant person and accepting. So it's her nature to accept. It was her nature to accept, I think, what I had written, and sort of, and I'm lucky about that. But
yeah. And it seems very important. Somebody mentioned that their mom had problems, but so did they. It seems very important when you're writing about a memory of another person and you're talking about something negative about them, that you're not just in judgment of them, but you're admitting that you're flawed too. Otherwise, we really don't trust you and you just sound like an ass.
Right. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
right. Yeah. True.
One more question just came in and then we'll probably wrap up in a few minutes. What was the hardest part of the process of the book for each of you?
Oh, that's a hard question. Let's see.
There's so many different parts.
Yeah.
The writing, the rewriting, the rewriting, the rewriting, the rewriting, the rewriting, because you write,
Yeah.
edit.
It really, it took a long time. I mean, right, there are different ways to answer that question. I'll answer that question this way, that I think like I had said earlier, I didn't think I had a lot of stories about my mother. Like, I just didn't think I had that much to say. And so I think the hardest part on one level was just sticking with it and continuing to write the book, you know, and finding more and more, you know, so that was big. But then, like Vicki's saying, I mean, there's the technical part of us putting it together and revising it and then all that. Yeah. So, but I would say that.
For me, it was very difficult to decide what to put into my section because I had more chapters and I tend to write longer pieces, so it was hard to decide, well, and that's when you start thinking about the book as a whole, just this whole world outside of our individual memories. It becomes, well, is this going to be too imbalanced? I mean, I know we thought about that sometimes. If there are too many very early childhood memories, and so that helped to guide me in terms of what I had to leave out. But
yeah. I guess that's true because there was a lot more I could have written, you know, I mean, but I guess choosing, you know, realizing what was the most important thing for me to say about our relationship that I thought might help other people with their relationships with their mothers or their daughters. That was a hard thing.
Yeah. Mm.
My cat just started meowing. There's the clock. Does anybody have any other questions or any comments?
I just wanted to say I thoroughly enjoyed this. I'm sitting in my room and listening to you guys and reminiscing about my own mother, who I lost about 8 years ago. And this was really great. I want to thank you guys so much for sharing this hour with us.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Yeah.
everyone, thank you for joining us.
It was nice to go back and reacquaint ourselves with our book. It was.
It was.
I bet.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you all, and thank you to the audience for coming out, and I'm grateful to be with all of you and think about our moms and our own motherhood and our writing. So we all have these very complicated stories in us. It's important to ask the questions and get people's stories while they're with us.
Yes.
Well, thank you. We'll call it a night.
I actually had a good time. Yay.
Good.
Let's go have wine and cheese.
Yeah.
All of you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Bye, guys.
Bye.